Hi. So today we're going to talk about the three most common mistakes I've seen people make as they try to integrate with a host culture. When we lived in Central Asia, to make ends meet, I had kind of a portfolio career. One of my gigs, one of my side hustles, was as a language and culture acquisition consultant. Basically, I helped people learn how to learn language and how to acquire culture so they could integrate with their host community successfully. Now, to be clear, most people who move overseas to intentionally function in a second or third culture have had training already. They already know about cultural dynamics. They know about things like high power distance versus low power distance, clock time versus event time, cultures that are more individualist versus cultures that are more collectivist. They often know some of the actual history of the country that they're moving to, and they've already gotten some data from colleagues on the ground as to what cultural mores might be. They already know how to dress like a local and maybe decorate their home like a local, and what kinds of things to say and how much to touch and how much to not touch and what's okay and what's taboo. They already know all of the level one basic stuff. And that's actually what gives rise to the first mistake. So mistake number one is confusing cultural awareness for cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is a measurable and malleable competency. That means that you can take a test and find out how culturally intelligent you are right now. It's especially useful to take it with other people that kind of rate your competency themselves. It's a multi-rater approach that the CQ Center can give you. But it's also malleable in the sense that you can change it, you can grow it, you can get more culturally intelligent. So cultural intelligence comprises four basic competencies. The first one is CQ motivation. How motivated are you to cover the distance, or at least more than half of the distance between you and the other people? How much do you think it's your job to change? Versus how much do you think it's your job to educate the other people as to how they should change, how they could do this more efficiently or be smarter about something? How motivated are you to cover the distance? The second competency is CQ knowledge, and that's the stuff that you're typically trained in. What are the signal systems that are used to communicate here? How do they use color and time? How do they use light and sound? How do they use distance and smell? Like what are the signals that communication is conveyed through? Then also things like taboos and mores and values, and it's the culture stuff up here. You don't feel it in your gut, you know it here. The third competency, though, is CQ strategy. How adept are you at taking what you know about culture, fueled by your motivations, and find a way to do normal things differently because you are operating in a foreign culture, in a second or third, or perhaps even a multicultural environment? And finally, the fourth competency is action. There are a lot of people, so many people, I was one of these people, who are motivated to cover the distance, and they are knowledgeable of the culture, and they know why things are done the way they're done. They know why it's so important to wash your car like every 2 days. It's so important to the community, to your neighbors, to you. It should be important to you to have a clean car in this particular culture. And you can even come up with a plan to work it into their normal life, but they just can't pull the trigger. It just feels wrong. It just never gets on the top of the list to actually wash the car every other day. CQ action is your likelihood to actually do the thing that you strategized, right? So the first mistake that I've seen people make, that I also made, was to confuse knowing about a culture or even about cultures with actually being culturally intelligent. The reason this is such a fatal mistake is because having knowledge trends you toward a fixed mindset. Seeing it as a malleable intelligence trends you towards a growth mindset. And so you never arrive, but you keep getting better at being a guest in host culture. So the second very common mistake that I've noticed people make is to place a higher value on being understood than we place on understanding. This particularly speaks to issues of language acquisition. So the way language is actually acquired, your first language, is you listen a very, very great deal. And even before you listen, you hear. But you listen and you seek to understand. You hear and understand so many words, commands, speech utterances, communications from your parents before you ever utter your first word. And then your language continues to develop with your listening and understanding outstripping your spoken speech continually to a point where you become completely fluent in the language. Your vocabulary might not be the vocabulary of a brain surgeon, but by age 4, you're fluent. Age 5, you're fluent in your mother tongue, even though you have absolutely no concept of grammar whatsoever. So grammar is talking about a language. It isn't speaking a language, and it's certainly not understanding a language. So here's the mistake. Here's how this desire to understand gets subsumed by a desire to make yourself understood. We moved to a foreign culture as adults, and we moved from a place where we were used to using words to control our environments, to get what we wanted, to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish, to convey what we wanted conveyed. We knew how to make people understand us the way we wanted to be understood. This not only meets tactical needs, but deep psychological needs. When you move into a foreign linguistic system, as a linguistic system that's very different from your own, you're a child again. And for as much as we like to talk about being a child or having a beginner mind or, being humble, acting like students, no one wants to. So this is most commonly seen in the way we approach trying to learn a language. We will enter the place and we will immediately try to read. We will get a book with our language written in it, with blanks in it so we can put the right grammar forms in the slots. We'll write before we can speak. We will read before we can listen. We will get all the skills backwards. So the actual communicative competencies include listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Reading and writing are not anywhere near as important as listening and speaking. And speaking is not as important as listening. You can actually produce speech spontaneously if you have listened enough, but you cannot understand more by saying more things. So the final skill on top of those 4 is maybe grammatical competency. But we enter a foreign language system and we get a list of nouns from a teacher and we're told that these are nouns. And then we get a list of verbs and we're told that these are verbs. We're doing grammar. Before we can even say the words, we're doing grammar. Before we even know what the words mean when we hear them, we're doing grammar, right? And then we take those lists of grammar and we memorize them and immediately begin to produce them before we even know what they're supposed to sound like. And then we wonder 2 years later why our accent never changes, why everyone always knows that we're not from here. We're shocked and awed that our language competency stopped growing about a year and maybe 2 years into where we live. Sorry, it's 11:30. It's time for all of the dogs in my neighborhood to mysteriously howl spontaneously at exactly the same time every day. So near the top of why we do this, at the surface level, this is how we've come to understand languages are learned. We're just, forgive me, a little bit wrong about how language gets learned. We learn about language and we think that in fact we've learned it. Language is acquired the way swimming is acquired. You can read books about swimming, you can learn the names of the strokes, you can lay down on the ground and pretend to stroke all day long, but you actually have to be in the water incompetent for a while before you actually acquire the ability to swim. The same is true of language. But below this kind of unclarity about how language is acquired, there is a deep, deep psychological issue going on in our hearts. We want to use language to control our environment because our environment feels chaotic and frightening to us. So we want more than anything else to be able to make words so that other people might be able to do what we want. So that the landlord can get the plumbing fixed, so that the police officer can understand that we didn't know that law, so that the lady at the post office can actually give us our package even if we don't have the particular document that we think we need. We want to be understood. This desire, unexamined desire to be understood, if it outstrips our desire to understand, our ability to understand will never catch up with our ability to be understood. It's impossible to identify with people that you do not understand. It is impossible to deeply convey love to people who do not think you can understand them. This mistake is made almost at day one, and then it is doubled down on over and over and over again unconsciously until we notice, wait a minute, I can't understand when my closest friends are telling me about their hearts. Why do I think they're going to care when I tell them about the one who lives in mine? This isn't a small matter, right? So mistake number 3 is related to this, and it is like a refusal to be weak. The better way to say this is we refuse to subject ourselves to the forces to which our friends are subject. That's hard to understand probably, and that's the simplest way I know how to say it. We insulate ourselves from the forces that diminish the quality of our friends' lives. We find ways to not play by their rules. Let me tell you a story. So in this consultancy work, I sometimes talk with teams in other places that I've also visited or worked with or where I have contacts. And there was one team who and like many teams in this part of the world, they taught English. They had a business teaching English, but business wasn't good. They weren't bringing in students like they used to, and they needed to shift. They needed to pivot. A lot of their people were new on the field. They had been, in country for a year or less. And through some contacts I had, we found a way to get each of them hired in local schools run by local people with real jobs that really paid and that were steady, and they didn't even have to work a ton. It was maybe a 20-hour week, secured visa, which was like gold there, so hard to get a visa there, and give them a lot of time for their own side hustles, their own things that were particularly terribly important to them. But more than that, it gave them something called an integrated identity. It gave them a way for their local friends to understand who they are and where they work and why they work there, and it's a job people understood. So they stopped worrying that these people were odd. So they kind of interrogated the opportunity with me, and then they went and they talked. I was a consultant. I didn't really care what the results were of their conversation, but I was surprised by the results of their conversation. So they came back and they said, yeah, this looks like a sweet gig and it ticks every single box. It even allows us ways to get more people in country here doing what we do with people. But here's the thing, we really like having our team meetings on Monday. And if we taught at local schools, we wouldn't be able to tell them that we can't be there on Monday because we have to have our team meeting on Monday. I said, well, could you have your team meeting on another day? I know that sounds, probably mind-blowingly crazy, but could you have your team meeting on another day? And they said, well, it's hard because Monday's when we have team meetings, and so that's why we can't have team meetings on another day. Yeah, I'm seeing what you're saying. But let's say, for example, that historically team meetings had been on Thursday. Would you be okay to have team meetings on Monday? No, because then it would have been on Thursday. And so since it had been on Thursday, we couldn't change it. So we have to keep it on Thursday. Okay, so multiple paying jobs are not worth getting with secured visas, which are all in danger of being thrown out of this country because you got every team meeting on Monday. Again, I'm a consultant, so I actually say that like it sounds sane, even though it sounds like crazy talk to me. They said, well, then the other thing is we don't really want to have local bosses. We don't, they literally said, we don't want to have to put ourselves under the authority of a local employer. And they had great reasons. There were great reasons. There are also great reasons to be under the authority of a local employer, but they had great reasons why not. So I'm not even suggesting that their decision was bad. But when they said that phrase, we don't want to put ourselves under, it made me think of Paul the Apostle, who said, to those without the law, I became as one without the law. To those with the law, or those under the law, I became one under the law. I have become all things to all men, so that by all means I might rescue some. This become word's kind of important, right? Because our changeless God, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, who never changes, sure does become a lot. In John 1, the word doesn't put on flesh. The word becomes flesh and dwells among us. He becomes us. He becomes us and then lives with us our lives the way we live them. Paul goes on later to say that he becomes all things to all men. And he even says about Jesus, he says, the first Adam became a living soul, but the last Adam, the second Adam, became, this is Jesus now, became a life-giving spirit. Jesus is in the becoming business. When you become someone, as Jesus, as the Son of God, the divine Logos, the infinite second person of the Trinity, became us to reach us so we could behold his glory. When we beheld his glory, we understood him a little bit. John says that the problem that the world faces, in John 1:18, he says, no one has seen God at any time. If they could just see God, if they could just understand God, if they could understand God the way he's making himself understood, if they could do that, everything would be all right. But no one has seen God at any time. But the only begotten God has exegeted him. He has led him out to be seen. He has made him understood. But 4 verses before that, the way he did that was, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. The writer of Hebrews says that he did this in order to understand what it was like to be us. The way you come to understand what it feels like to be a person in a place is we subject ourselves to the forces to which they are subject. Now, it's impossible to completely subject yourself to the forces that someone else is subject to because you have a passport from a different country and you probably speak more languages than some of them. You have had educational opportunities that they haven't had, so you're not going to be able to subject yourself to illiteracy. But you can make choices. You can make choices that amount to becoming vulnerable to the things that are dangerous to them. You can make choices to not use power to insulate yourself against the things that they have no power over. The way of Jesus is vulnerability every time, chosen by us. But this is a mistake, especially we Americans are prone to make. And I don't know if others are equally prone. I just can feel the proneness in me. I'm aware deeply of my freedom. So here in Spain, when the lockdowns were extremely severe, a lot of folks just categorically ignored rules, just categorically ignored them in ways that were sort of an embarrassing testimony to local friends, because we didn't really think that we were subject to the rules that they were subject to. We felt that passport more than we felt our solidarity with our neighbor. That's not, deeply immoral, but it isn't okay. Yeah, it definitely slows down our ability to become flesh, their flesh, and dwell among them. So these aren't 3 horrible sins of cross-cultural work, right? These are 3 mistakes that I see most commonly made by trained and prepared people that prevents us from integrating with our host culture. And that leaves us lonely and them clueless about a gospel that should be visible, could be visible, if we were to maybe not put on local life like a suit, but become local life like a baby, like a vulnerable beginner. So the 3 mistakes again are confusing cultural knowledge, cultural awareness for cultural intelligence. And this is a problem because your cultural knowledge becomes at some point fixed and fossilized, and so you take on a fixed mindset. Cultural intelligence is by nature malleable, and so you can increasingly become culturally intelligent, and that puts you in a growth mindset, and people in a growth mindset always do better than people in a fixed mindset. Number 2, seeking to be understood, to make yourself understood more vigorously than you seek, or even before you seek to understand. And this most commonly is expressed in the way we approach language acquisition and the reasons we approach language acquisition, and then what we do with our linguistic competency once we get there. It could be that listening is the master skill of language, and listening might be the master skill of disciple making, and listening might be the master skill of love. And then finally, refusing. When given the opportunity, refusing to submit ourselves, to subject ourselves to the forces that our local friends are subject to. We have to be as mortal as they are if we are to tell the truth about Jesus the way Jesus told the truth about himself. All right, love and peace. In our next video, we will probably talk about how to integrate with another community, your team, right? So integration with community is often an issue, both of integrating with host culture, but also integrating with the people that you're trying to do this stuff with. And that is often just as tricky. Leave a comment below, give me a question, light me up and tell me you disagree. I would love the interaction. Thanks.